Ave Maria Purísima, Mary most pure. I'm continuing the talks of Reyes and Estela Reese. And the last time I talked to you, I was talking to you about Reyes making the Cursillo and the changes that were made by God in his life and how he came out of there a totally different man. Well, I'm going to tell you what happened to me, Estela, his wife. When Reyes came out of the Cursillo, he was so different that I didn't even recognize him. He came out, he was going to Mass every day. He always had prayed the rosary, but now he was praying more than one rosary. He was praying 2 or 3 rosaries. And he began to act very different. He began to go to meetings that they used to have. I felt like left out. I thought, what is going on here? And so I went straight to the priest who was in charge of the Cursillos at that time. He had been the one with a group of men that had brought it in from Texas. And he was running the Cursillo movement at that time. His name was Father Alfonso Duran. He was a strong, strong soldier of God. And he lived his life for that. So when I went to him, he kind of looked at me and I told him, I need to just speak to you about my husband. And he kind of smiled a little and he looked at me and he said, well, what do you mean? I said, I mean, he came in here, one person, and now he's home and he's another person. And I can't allow that he come out and that he has changed, and I don't understand what's going on. I want to be able to understand what's going on. And so whatever this is that you've given him, I want. Because we have a family that we need to lead, and I want to walk in the same path that he's walking. And he kind of smiled and he said, well, you know, there is a Cursillo for women coming up. It's going to be the first women Cursillo because he had just barely brought it in. He said, but it's already full. I don't know if we can fit you in there. I said, well, I think you better fit me in there because even if you don't, I'm still going to come. And you're going to have to throw me out physically if you don't let me. And he was just smiling, hearing me. And he said, okay, we're going to let you come. So go ahead, plan to come. So I did. So I packed my things, got ready. Reyes stayed with the kids. And I was expecting, at that time, I was expecting a child. And so I came to the Cursillo expecting a child. I think was maybe like 6-7 months of my term. And I made the Cursillo. In those days, for the first women's Cursillo, we didn't stay the 3 days like they did for the men's Cursillo because there were no women who could stay with the ladies. The men used to stay overnight. The men couldn't have stayed with the women, of course, because it wasn't proper. And they had no women yet that had done Cursillos, so they had to do it in a period of a week. And it was like every evening we went to the Cursillo to, they had it in one of the churches, Immaculate Heart, I think it was. And that's where we went. They had it in the basement over at Immaculate Heart. And we used to go there. And the men were the ones that did the talks on, the talks that are given in the Cursillo. And so that's the way we attended the first women's Cursillo. That's the way we attended, by going every evening, Monday through Friday, and then I think several hours on Saturday, and then we terminated on, we ended on Sunday. So that was the first women's Cursillo. And I understood, you know, I was a little different than Reyes. It wasn't the same as Reyes. For him, it was like a punch in the stomach and throwing out all his air and then inhaling different air. For me, it wasn't, because I had always been a daughter for my mother, the only daughter, who had been very, very disciplined, very much protected. I was not allowed to do crazy things. I didn't come with a worldly look of life. I came with a very protected life being daughter of my mother was very protective. And so I didn't have experiences of great sin, but of course I was a woman, and we all are sinners, and we all have our ways of doing things that we're not supposed to. So, but I had always been close to the church. My mom had always been very close to the church. And so she used to teach catechism when I was a young lady. And so I didn't come to the Cursillo like not knowing God and church, but never expecting what the Cursillo brings. I believe the Cursillo brings the Holy Spirit in such a powerful way that if you've never experienced this power, it overtakes you and helps you to understand the great love of God for His people. And I think that's what the secret is there in the Cursillo. And I did go, and I did come out ready to do work for God. And Reyes and I became Cursillistas that helped. For almost 10 years we worked in the Cursillo. And I worked very many Cursillos, leading the weekend, because after the women made the Cursillo, then we were able to have the Cursillo for 3 days. And we used to go spend the 3 nights with the rest of the ladies that were coming in to make Cursillo. And so the women's Cursillo took place or began. And I was one of the people that began to work it. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved it. I loved it very much. And Reyes and I began to work for God at that time. It was very special for us. Our lives were changed. We began to see God as a very important part of our lives. He went to daily mass. I had, of course, the little ones that were growing up. I had then Becky, the first daughter, was born, Rebecca. And then a year after, Reyes Jr. was born. And then 2 years after, Rosie, our last daughter, was born, Rosemary. And so we were still having our children, and I was still working Cursillo, and Reyes would stay home with the kids for the 3 days of Cursillo. And we worked with this wonderful priest who helped us to grow in our spirituality. And he was responsible for many, many people becoming very special people for God. I know many of the people that made Cursillo with Reyes and I, and now years later, they have become deacons. Many of them are continuing to work very close to evangelization. So there were so many beautiful things that happened out of there. Out of there, we had people. One of the big organizations that they have here in Phoenix, the City of the Lord, was started by a good friend of ours, a Cursillista. Many things were born out of Cursillo. Cursillo was responsible for many beautiful things happening because the Holy Spirit came to move people and to get them to move to God's love. So it was a great blessing for Reyes and I. And for the next 8-9 years, we gave ourselves completely to the Cursillo. And it was well worth it. The one thing that happened during that time is that Reyes grew in much, not only in his love for our Blessed Mother, but he grew in the love of God. He learned he met Jesus in the Eucharist there at the Cursillo, and he fell in love with Jesus in the Eucharist. And he became devoted to Jesus in the Eucharist. During that time, he also met a man who I will tell you about later. He was not just a man, he was a priest, Father Aloysius Alacuria, who became Reyes' spiritual director and helped him to grow greatly in his love for God.